and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. I'm your host, Richie Leahy, here with my co-host, Maddie B. Doing a show a little bit different today because we are on Christmas break. So, recording a little bit ahead of time. I'm not worrying about the video since I'll be out visiting this week. So, just putting this out there. Not sure how long the show will be, but just Merry Christmas to everyone. Thank you for your support. Visit southboundsports.com to keep up with the latest episodes. Make sure you subscribe to our show. We'll be putting some extra things up there, some new t-shirts and stuff. So check it out, tell your friends, and we thank you for your support and hope everyone has a happy new year. In terms of football, Steelers get absolutely killed. And I see the notice before the game. It's like, Kelsey's not going to play. And so I'm like, all right, well, is that a tease? Like, what's going to happen? And it didn't really matter. I think they were down at one point. It was like 17-0. And I thought, like, what are we doing? Like, I looked up, and they were driving down and close to scoring. I think they ended up missing the field goal. And that's when I knew, like, all right, they're checked out. So you know who else is checked out? Me. Like, not really going to care at this point. So I don't know if they can get to the playoffs. I know the end of the schedule is kind of rough. So, like, in terms of what they're doing, I don't have a good feeling going forward, to be honest. And I said that at the beginning of the year. So we're actually recording this during Monday Night Football, so I don't know the results of the Dolphins game. They're playing the Saints right now. They are up. So that might affect some of the standings right now. But in terms of, like, the playoff picture, Pittsburgh's in 10th. They're so far behind that they have to win out. They already have the tiebreaker right now over Miami in terms of strength of victory. But they still have to play the Browns, who are also trending down. They got absolutely throttled by Green Bay. I don't even know what the score ended up being. Oh, it was close. But they just didn't seem like they were even in that game at all to begin with. It ended up being 24-22. I thought, what'd they do? They did some funky stuff. They missed some extra points and stuff, didn't they?
Yeah.
Like, it just felt like they were out of it. And so you play them. They are not eliminated yet. But you got to play them, and then you got to play Baltimore. Baltimore right now is the 7th seed. So what do you think? What were your thoughts on that game? And what do you think the feeling is going into the last 2 weeks?
Well, I think when you started to watch the game, it was just like Kansas City was projected to be the representative from the AFC to make the playoffs. So, I mean, I thought this is going to be a good marker to see where we're at. Because if they play competitively with Kansas City, they can pretty much play with anyone else in the AFC. Like, that's going to be the toughest team they're going to face. And they got absolutely stomped. And I don't know if you saw this, but the offensive line coach left. He's out. Yeah. He's going to Oregon.
I know. So, I didn't know if we talked about that or not. I couldn't remember what the week was.
No. So the current line coach, Adrian Clem, he's out. He went to Oregon, and the Steelers announced that today.
Did they announce it? I heard that rumored last week. And so I thought, you know what? When a coach is moving ahead of time, I always wonder what's going to be the impact. You know, because if they're out there doing their coaching, they're not paying attention. And I'll probably forget to mention it when we get into the college football, but Oregon also hired the defensive coordinator from Georgia. He came out today and said he's currently working both jobs. So he said that because of the 3-hour delay on the West Coast, he spends his mornings planning for the college football playoff. And then when his shift is over, basically I'm like paraphrasing here. So, but when the time changes occur, then he shifts into Oregon mode. But I'm like, bro, you're spending half your day doing each. And you're like recruiting for Oregon all night? Like, what does that even mean? You're not going to be focused on the playoffs. I don't know if there's going to be a major impact. But like when I hear of a coach leaving in the middle of the season to like go to college to be the line coach, right?
As someone who's been through this before, it absolutely affects your team. It absolutely affects the way that the game is played. 100%.
And so it's like, all right, you're going to do that, and then your offensive line doesn't move the ball or stop the Chiefs at all. It's like, all right, well, how much of that is going to affect your team when they're like, hey, you know what, we're close to the playoffs, and I'm going to bail for you to just go to a college program that's, not even in the playoffs. Hasn't been good since when did they play Florida State that year? 2014?
Yeah.
Like, hasn't really been competing. I know they beat Ohio State this year, but it's like, hasn't been competing. Got killed by a bad Stanford team. All right. That's where you're going to go instead of helping the Steelers get to the playoffs, but whatever. At some point, you have to have that focus, I think.
But I think he could have saw the writing on the wall too, because the offensive line has continued on a downward trajectory, and it just there's so many issues that it's tough to even tell what the hell the problems are anymore.
Well, I think it's some of it's quarterbacking. Like, let's be honest, and play calling. But again, every time you hear at the end of the year, like, oh, we're going to address the offensive line, we're going to address so-and-so. We're going to get some new weapons. We're going to get a new offensive coordinator. But then everything looks the same. So whenever everything looks the same, I'm kind of like, are they really making any changes at all? Because I don't think they are. Right?
Well, I don't know how much of it is it's a copycat league, and you're just getting recycled people from recycled people that they're running similar stuff. I mean, I was high on Canada to begin with, thinking that he was going to do a lot more trades and shifts, but you're not seeing any of that stuff. So I don't know if he's being handcuffed again, because like when the 1 year that he was really successful at Pitt, he was having multiple trades, multiple shifts, doing all kinds of stuff pre-snap to mess with the defense. So they couldn't really tee off and line up a certain way. He was getting into these different formations, and it was helping him. But then he went to LSU, and definitely Ogeron put the handcuffs on him and didn't want him doing that stuff, which got him fired from LSU. And now it just seems like they're just in a rut where the offense really hasn't changed since Haley left.
And that's where some of the stuff like being handcuffed, I don't know how much of that is true versus how much of it is the quarterback that's just like, hey, you know what? I'm not really going to be changing soon. Like, just do your thing. I'm going to do this. You can put in the codes. And whenever they're making a big play about it, where it's like, hey, Ben Roethlisberger said they're changing the terminology and doing all this new stuff, I'm kind of like, really? And I know we talked about it on the show, and we kind of were hoping that happened, but I don't really think it has.
Well, I think he had an opportunity to move it, and we've said before about the hot seat for Tomlin. If Pittsburgh misses the playoffs, I think he's going to have a shot at firing Canada and bringing in new offensive coaches. But he better make the most of it, because if they start off slow, I think he will have a hot seat.
Well, that's where it's like, if Ben leaves, I don't think they really go to the hot seat, because he's been one of the winningest coaches. And I think you really kind of say, hey, we've let you ride with Ben. Now go get your guy. And if he, let's say he secretly, he wants like an Aaron Rodgers, like I've talked about, or someone else, do the Steelers make that move for him and really help it out? Because just look at the difference between Aaron Rodgers' play and Ben Roethlisberger's. And I know I was rough on Rodgers last year at the end of the year when he didn't run in the playoffs and took that. It kind of seems like he's playing angry. And the Steelers haven't had that motivation since when? They always seem like they're playing scared. And they're making dumb mistakes. And everyone's like, well, these guys are young. These guys are young. It's usually Ben and a bunch of younger guys. It's like, yeah, but where are the vets? You bring on Eric Ebron, and he's pretty awful. But where are the other vets on offense that can kind of just get you a first down? Or who in the offense do you really trust with the ball? You can't just keep getting these new playmakers every couple years. Some of it, I don't know if it's on the front office, but but in Green Bay, who do they have other than Devontae Adams?
Well, I think Green Bay's offensive line is hands down better than Pittsburgh's, and it's not even close, because Pittsburgh's starting 3 rookies? Is it 3 or 4 rookies?
I don't know off the top of my head.
At one point, I know they had 3 rookies starting, and it was that's a tall order to have that many young, inexperienced guys on your offensive line.
Well, I don't know if it's going to get any better, because maybe that's where they're going, looking for that rebuild, and maybe they go there. Maybe that's the move that they do. I mean, if you're looking around really the league, and you're honestly one of these other quarterbacks that's available, and you're saying like, oh yeah, well, you want to play in a division with the Browns, Bengals, and Ravens, and oh yeah, you won't even get to the Super Bowl because at the top, the man, Tom Brady's there, at least for now. I mean, maybe he retires, maybe not, I don't know. But like, you're looking around and you're like, or no, Patrick Mahomes, I mean, Tom Brady's on the NFC. So if you're looking at the NFC teams, you're like, oh, Tom Brady's there, he's probably going to retire. And then, and that's it. Like if Aaron Rodgers moves to the AFC or something, like you have him. What other NFC team do you look at and have a quarterback where you're like, oh yeah, they're locked in there? Dak, maybe? Maybe. Not even. Matt Stafford's old with the Rams. Kyler Murray, he looked awful on Saturday. They didn't even win that game, did they? I'm trying to think. No, they lost. So he looked awful in that game, and he looked like he was playing scared. And so it makes me think, like, if you're a quarterback and you're weighing your moves right here, and you're thinking, if I go to the NFC, or if you're Aaron Rodgers, you stay in the NFC. When Tom Brady retires, that's it. It's your turn to make a couple last-ditch runs, and there might be some teams that step up, but in the AFC, you have Mahomes, like I said. The Titans are there, depending on how you feel about Tannehill. The Bills, same way with Josh Allen. And then maybe the Ravens with Lamar, if he takes that next step. I think the NFC is still more open than the AFC. What do you think?
I think the NFC is more open, but I think realistically, if you're a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers right now, who do you want to face twice a year? The Bears, the Vikings, and Detroit? Or do you want to face Cincinnati, the Bengals, and Ravens?
Well, if you're and you're looking at your legacy too, so yeah, you know where you're going to stay.
Like, I know you've really pushed to have him go to Pittsburgh, and like for that final run and that final push, like that kind of makes some sense. But I think he's also made a good bit of his career out of playing crap teams twice a year that help pad his stats.
Well, I think he kind of brought that up in the latest game. They had like an interview they played with him. I don't know if it was pregame or if it was during the game that I saw this, where he was saying like he sounded like humble, and he was like, yeah, these are the good times or whatever. He's going to look back at them and know that they're the good times. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like he actually is ready to leave though, you know, because he's right there and he's kind of like hearing it, but I don't know if he wants to leave, because the good times he might be thinking his playing time and just in the NFL in general. He might be thinking of something else where he's doing it. I just didn't get the vibe where he really sounded like, hey, in the future, I'm going to really be like bummed out or whatever because I made a decision to go to Pittsburgh or some other team. And then if that happens, who do you go after? Deshaun Watson? Like, do you take a gamble like that, or you just start clean with a rookie and just go into rebuild mode? And I don't know how many years do you think it would take for them to compete? 2, 3 at the minimum?
If you go the rebuild route, I think you have to look 2 to 3, because I think you're number one, your offensive and defensive lines need retooled. And I think they have a bright spot in Harris, and I think they have potential in Freiermuth. Nothing from the receiving core gives me any confidence at all, unless Juju truly is that missing variable in all of this. I mean, he's been out for the better part of the season, but like, to me, all of the celebrating and all of the nonsense, like, you're getting your ass handed to you. There's no reason you should be celebrating anything. Like, I don't understand how you allow that to happen. Like, that has to be something aggressively that they're telling these guys, don't do that.
And that's where maybe you just have the young core, like you said, the linemen, and that's your focus.
I think you focus on the line, but then I think you also make a point to address it in front of the entire team. Look at how stupid you look, and you call them out. And basically, you bully them in front of everyone, and you publicly shame them. We're down 30 points, and you're pointing for a first down because you made a catch after dropping the previous 3. Like, and you just humble them into just doing the stuff that you need them to do. Make routine plays and get back to some of the fundamental stuff that made the organization great.
So you think that's going to be a route that they're able to go?
I don't think they will, because I think Tomlin is so laid back. But I think that's something that they should do, because how many times over the last, and I'll expand it to say 10 years, have you seen stupid plays by the skill positions that it's just swept under the rug? And you had Claypool pulled for his like gesturing and taunting type stuff, but then Ray McLeod, like, he points and gets that taunting penalty at the bench, and he stays in. It's like, are you picking and choosing when you're going to be a stickler for some of these standards?
Well, I think that's one of the problems. You kind of have to be even about it, because you don't want to be the guy that's, I don't even know. Like, you have to kind of just be across the board a locker room type guy to do that rebuild. Like, look at what Bill Belichick did with Tom Brady. It took a year or two. He brought in a veteran with Cam Newton, but he got everything back under his control, and there hasn't really been any controversy for him to do that and focus on the team. I mean, I was even critical of him whenever things weren't working well. But now it's kind of like, oh, you know what? Maybe he was focused in the right way, you know? It's not like they completely blew everything up, but they're not having that drop-off either.
No, but I think when you, like, comparing the two, where I think you can build around Najee Harris and his willingness to eat 80% of the team snaps. You know, they had some significant pieces around first, and then all they had to do is add a game manager to the mix. And, you know, take any one of the other quarterbacks from this past year's class and plug them in New England. I think they're going to have comparable success. Like, I don't think that it's like a sudden, I don't know where it came from. Like, I think it's not like Belichick's asking him to do ridiculous things. Like, he's playing within the scope of what he wants from the offense.
Well, yeah, that's true. And they really didn't have a lot of passing game attack in a lot of those games. Like, what was the Bills one? 3 passes or whatever? I'm trying to think. Yeah. I'm getting confused as I try to think through it. But at that point, you really don't know how much of it is the coach versus the players whenever the coaches can put that much pressure on them other ways. So, I don't know. The other topic for NFL stuff was like fantasy football championships. So good luck to everyone that's out there. Man, COVID outs have killed a lot of like game planning. I feel bad for anyone else that's still alive. I was in the semifinals. I think I sent Matt a screenshot of 5 people being out. It ended up being like 6 or 7. And I'm talking starters. Like, even I joked, like, even my backup's backup were out because, like, I picked up a quarterback, and what was it? Like, the guy from the Bills that was, or not the Bills, the Ravens that was backing up for Lamar. He had a great game. I'm like, I'll get him. I put him in my lineup. No later, 5 minutes later, I get the message. Oh, yeah, congrats. You won that auction to get him, but he's also out with COVID. So I'm like, are you kidding me? And then I got Gabriel Davis, my big man. I said, like, maybe look out for this guy out with COVID. It's like when you have a backup wide receiver, that's your guy. And To be fair, the guy I played against ended up getting like a ridiculous amount of points, so it didn't even make me feel bad because I'm like, I probably would have lost anyway. His team had a good weekend. But just having no chance kind of soured me on it, so I feel bad for anyone else that had that same situation because I know a couple of guys I talked to were like, yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm like, yeah, I can't really do anything. It's almost like whatever happens, I think I said, I don't need to win. I really need the other team just to lose. That's my only chance at that point. And I don't know if it's going to get any better. It looks like the NBA was doing something with it where they changed like the downtime. I think I saw some were talking about only testing if you have symptoms. So that would definitely make the change in terms of like vaccinated versus unvaccinated. I don't know what details they're going to do, but let's say they added that extra week. It's going to buy them some time because we have 2 weeks now. Imagine if we had this week of cancellations, next weekend we go into it, and then the following week was playoffs. Like, what would they do if some of these guys aren't back yet? Like, the Chiefs go into the playoffs, not against an old, aging Ben Roethlisberger, but like, what if they're in the playoffs and Kelsey's out or so-and-so's out and like teams have their entire quarterback room out like the Ravens and you're the last seed? You really think you're going to get an upset? Like, come on. I don't know what they're really going to do. I don't know if they would just take 2 weeks off and kind of push it back. You can't do a bubble in the NFL. But we'll have to keep an eye on it and see what happens.
I don't think you bubble, but I think as a team, they could potentially do something where you're like, hey, we're going to be on site or do stuff to try to like rally around each other to be like, hey, these next couple weeks, we need to make sure everyone's healthy. Like if you're minimize outside visitors, extracurricular stuff, like till we get through the playoffs and then go back to doing whatever it is that you want to do.
And that's something where maybe you're right. Maybe that's just the focus that they do. But I don't really know outside of that what more they can do. Like you're at the point where it's year 2 now. So you're year 2, you've had the protocols in place, and now you have to make changes on the fly. New variant, playoff time. It's not like in September where you kind of got the heads up and you're like, all right, we can make these plans before the season, or I guess August, whatever. Now they're like, all right, yeah, we're in the thick of it. What do we do? Are we going to panic and go crazy before playoff time? But they're not the only league that's facing it. College football, they're doing through their bowl game cancellations. But first, do you have anything else for the NFL before we hop into it?
No.
So with the bowl games right now, so many are just getting canceled, and there's been outright flips. I think, was it the Sun Bowl I saw? I don't know if it was finalized today because I haven't really been up on the news, but one of the teams canceled from the Sun Bowl, and the payout for that game was like $4 million or something I saw. And then whatever game that Barstool was sponsoring had a cancellation, and they were trying to get Washington State, I think, to leave the Sun Bowl to come to their bowl. The payout was like $600,000. So like they're like, no, we're not doing it. Like you've got to be joking. We're not giving up a $4 million payout to go play in your bowl game. I mean, theirs is on CBS. The other one's streaming on Barstool or YouTube or something. And so they came back, and I think they were able to get out of the Arizona one. So the Barstool game is canceled, I believe, unless they're able to fill it on like such short notice. And so the team that's was going to play in that one, because I think Boise State had to cancel. So I think the team that was going to play in that one is now going to go ahead, and they are going to be playing Washington State in the Sun Bowl. I think it was the Sun Bowl. So crazy week. I'm afraid of it for playoffs. We're going to talk playoffs separately, so I don't want to get into that now. But just in terms of other bowl games, number one, they don't matter. I don't know. I know that they're trying to get those sponsors and stuff. Every year it gets worse and worse. And I saw someone say like, oh, well, the Rose Bowl means so much. And I feel like the older generation is really, really holding on to the Rose Bowl as something that really matters. But like, if you're being realistic, let's say Penn State, because I know we have a lot of Penn State listeners. Penn State this year, they had a chance to be in the Rose Bowl where Ohio State is? Or do you think they would rather be in the Orange Bowl where Michigan is in the playoffs? Because as much as you want to say the Rose Bowl means something, it means absolutely nothing. I don't care. I heard someone tell me, and it was an older guy, he told me that winning the Rose Bowl would mean more than losing in the playoffs. And I'm like, no. That's why the teams that are making the playoffs are getting such big recruiting bumps, because people think like that. And these smaller programs are like, hey, we're Rose Bowl champs or we're Holiday Bowl champs or whatever bowl champs they are. It doesn't matter. Other schools are going to say like, yo, we're going to be in the playoffs. And guess what? When you're in the playoffs, you don't sit out. You don't even have to play in the Senior Bowl or whatever. I mean, Kenny Pickett sits out of the bowl game, and then I think he signed up for the Senior Bowl. Which to me, it's kind of like, why? Why do that at all?
Well, because the Senior Bowl is coached by
scouts.
Well, by the teams that are drafting high. So you have a chance to make that good first impression. That it makes sense for him to play in that, because if you're going to potentially be drafted high, you want to at least have that opportunity to showcase where you're at. Where with some of those bowls, like if Pitt was playing in a playoff, he would most certainly be continuing to play. But why risk injury when you know, like, pretty sure he's going to be a first round draft pick?
Well,
why risk it?
So I had this in my notes. So I'm pretty sure we talked about this probably 3 years ago. Who knows how long this was. But I had brought up the idea of getting rid of the bowl games that aren't playoffs, hopefully expanding the playoffs to let these other teams fill in, but expanding the like showcase games, like the Senior Bowl and stuff like that, to have like conference or like certain affiliations. Kind of like, you know how like high school kind of does it, where you have like the rival schools on one side, or like I think Pennsylvania does a game against Ohio. High school teams to kind of see like which is better.
Yeah, the Big 33.
But like, could you imagine if they just had like kind of like the Big Ten ACC like challenge? Like, what if you did that where you took the rivals on one side, where like Michigan was on the side with Florida State, and then like Ohio State was on the other side, and they were teamed up with players from like Miami or like Clemson. Like, you just kind of split up the rivals, Pitt on one side, Penn State on the other. And then you had enough teams, because you're combining two conferences, to give these upperclassmen a chance. But realistically, they're playing against their rivals. And I think it would give the game something more meaningful. And I mean, to be honest, maybe the Big Ten just does it and has like, I don't think the East versus West or whatever the divisions are set up. I'm an advocate for splitting the divisions up differently, which I think we're going to go ahead and do that at some point, possibly on YouTube or something, as an extra bonus content. And maybe the same for the ACC, where then you could just have each division play each other after the season, where those guys, because I hear the argument that, hey, seniors or whatever, they need that one last chance to impress. But we always joke about the Orange Bowl and Michigan losing to Florida State that year because Peppers was out. But the real injury in that game, Jake Butt got hurt in the third quarter, something like midway through. He tore his ACL, which ruined his career.
Yeah.
Because he kept re-injuring it in the NFL. And he was going to be a high draft pick. And I always look back and I'm like, hey, I'm glad you played in that game. Michigan lost. Even if they would have won, I don't think anything would have changed. You know? Like, did it really help recruiting? Even if they beat Florida State, I don't think the narrative changes that Harbaugh can't beat Ohio State. Just like this year, if they lose to Georgia, okay, did it really matter if they beat Ohio State and they made the playoffs? He can use that to kind of recruit better next year on like a thing of hope. Like, hey, we've made the playoffs, we've beat Ohio State. We need you to come here to now win a national championship. That's our goal. And he's used that narrative in his interviews, so you know he's pushing it. So like the bowl game, did it really matter? Pepper sat it out, got drafted high, but didn't, got injured. And hasn't been the same. It didn't really have a long career, which everyone was kind of hoping that he did as a more dynamic pass-catching tight end. You lose a step with that knee injury. And, I mean, some of these guys, they're good in the NFL, and the margins are so thin that, like, if you stay healthy, I was just talking about this over the weekend, if you stay healthy and you have one of those longevity type records like Aaron Rodgers broke, that's a big difference than like a guy that might have a little bit more talent but doesn't stay healthy, or gets injured and then loses a little bit, and it flips the entire script on their career. So I'm not against them canceling them or players sitting out. I don't think they should be played. Maybe have like, I know like the Armed Forces Bowl or something, like do 1 or 2 and let some of the smaller programs kind of come up through. But like hell, maybe even have, instead of doing like an ACC, maybe like a Big Ten combination, maybe have the Big Ten join with the MAC. You know, and like the ACC join with like the Sun Belt or Conference USA or something on the East Coast, where you're playing kind of like different levels and letting some of those guys that didn't play with the higher talent play with the other ones in their regional version of the bowl game. And I mean, it's big because I think it would really help Big Ten recruiting too, and even some more in the ACC recruiting, where you constantly hear SEC, that's where the NFL players go. And I've said on this show that the Big Ten is more in the NFL footprint. There are more NFL teams in the Big Ten footprint than there are in the entire South. So, like, if you're putting together a regional showcase and you can use it as a recruiting event and say, like, look at all the teams that are where our colleges are. Wisconsin has one. Chicago has them. Ohio has like 3. Pennsylvania, like now, like in New Jersey. Like including like Boston College, like you have another one. You can pretty much go through all the states that are in that upper ACC area and the Big Ten area, and you're like, look, NFL teams are all through here. Pennsylvania has 2. I always forget about the Eagles because I hate them. But like just in terms of recruiting and kind of trying to shift that narrative of like SEC is getting all these teams in the playoffs when it's really Alabama carrying that conference. And possibly LSU mixed in there with some good years. But in terms of like that power dynamic, I've seen some things where they're like, look, SEC teams have made the playoffs or done this or that. It's like, yeah, but they've also had more opportunity. Like, you really can't compare them to the Pac-12 that only made a couple playoffs, or like the Big 12 where the same team's getting in and they're always in the 4 seed playing the number 1 team.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, well, of course, they're underdogs. Like, look at the matchup that Michigan got itself shoved into this year. Underdogs, when they easily could have been the number 1 and had a better matchup. But because of the SEC, it's like that narrative gets shifted. And now they'll be like, oh, yeah, well, see, the SEC has had success in the playoffs. Like, all right, great. But we'll see what happens. Anything else you have on Bulls that stood out to you?
I mean, I just was surprised at the number of teams that are now canceling games, and the one of the things I saw on Twitter that made me laugh was that you have these teams that have 90 players on their team, and even with 30 losses, like 30 players out, you still have enough guys that you could put together, you could put something on the field. And thinking of small high school programs that from week to week, you get 1 or 2 injuries and you're like scrambling to figure out how you're going to play, from week to week. It's like, come on, how do you not figure it out with 60 guys? Like, some of this you should be able to play, and how much of this is that worry? Because the message remains the same. Since I think it's 2007, Bobby Bowden still has 1 more win than Miami. So he's still winning in bowl wins versus the U.
Well, I'll say, I know the bowl record is something that people use, and they're probably locked in at this point, because I honestly think bowls are just going to be killed. Or teams are just going to they're just going to start declining them. I know right now the conference pressure is like on to like say like, hey, you can't turn down that money. But like once a lot more of these get rolled into the playoffs, the major ones like the Rose Bowl that keeps getting, that kind of is like, well, we matter. If you expand it, guess what? You don't have to shove the playoff games on Christmas Eve anymore, or New Year's Eve, anymore. You can have a 2-day playoff because you don't want that many games competing against itself anyway. So you just keep the Rose Bowl in its slot, and guess what? It's always a playoff game. And I think you just get rid of the tie-in where, okay, Michigan's a 2 seed this year. They're not going to play in the Rose Bowl, and it's no big deal. And let other teams play in. Like the gatekeeping from the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, which the Big Ten is idiotic for even wanting to keep that. They're the underdog. And it's an away game. Every time, it's like, why are you traveling all the way out there? It doesn't help your recruiting. Like, your recruiting is better because you make more money. And more people know the Big Ten schools. The Pac-12 is kind of seen as a weaker conference. You're keeping them alive by making them play a bowl game at one of their home stadiums. Like, what the hell are you doing? The Big Ten should be like, yeah, you know what? You're going to come play in the big house because guess what? It's bigger. F you. And come play Ohio State in the shoe. Or like, go play over here. And then watch your team get crushed because Ohio State's playing 9-3 Utah or whatever. But instead, now you're evening the field by making Ohio State fly out there. The fans aren't paying for tickets because they don't care anymore. And I think that's where the argument that I saw started. It's like, Ohio State, they're disrespecting the game. It's like, no one cares. No one cares. Like, if Michigan would have made the Rose Bowl, it would have felt like a disappointment, right? Because that means they would have lost the Big Ten championship to Iowa or whatever. If they would have made that when they were like, you know what, they really had a great season, they should be in the playoffs. And it's like, you know what, you didn't make it. Now you're picked for the Rose Bowl. Congratulations. Like, I hope you're happy. It's like, all right, great. Just where I want it to be. Everyone would know it would be a disappointment. Even when Penn State made it, remember when they won the Big Ten and Ohio State got picked over them? And that's where I go back and have some of these comments that I remember. People were like, well, it's going to be really big for Penn State if they're able to win this game. Did they win that game? I can't remember. There was that shootout with USC. So I can't remember who ended up winning that one. But it's like, okay.
No, he lost to Sam Darnold.
Yeah, so you're in that game. If you win that game, is it better than losing in the playoffs? No. No, not in a million years. What are you talking about? Now, Harbaugh can come in and say, like, look, we're one of only 2 coaches in the Big Ten right now that have made the playoffs. If Ryan Day leaves for the NFL, Harbaugh can say, I'm the only active coach in the Big Ten that has made the playoffs. And in every state that's in the Big Ten. And no one can recruit against that. And maybe it would shift some recruits away from Ohio State. I don't know. But like right now, it's only 2, Ryan Day and Harbaugh. Franklin could have been there, and it didn't happen. That's why I think Michigan State losing to Purdue, they have to be kicking themselves this year because that very easily could have been them beating Iowa in the Big Ten championship, even if they got killed by Ohio State and be pushing to the playoffs just because of how the end of the season went with Oklahoma State losing. Where they're like, all right, do we really put Michigan State out? Like, they won their conference and they only have 1 loss, even if it was a bad one. It was on the road. Like, what do you do? They were 100% going to put them in unless Michigan had, unless they like barely lost to Ohio State in overtime. No, they would. So Michigan would have been 1 loss too. And if Michigan State didn't lose to Penn or Purdue, they would have been in the Big Ten championship. So I guess maybe, could you imagine them putting in Michigan over Michigan State, a team that they lost to, and is the Big Ten champion? I mean, it's kind of like the Penn State year, but they would have the same record almost. Michigan State would have had a better record because I'm getting confused here, but they would have had the better record by 1 game because they played in the Big Ten championship. The only argument would have been like, yeah, they got killed by Ohio State as their only loss. But then they're like, well, Michigan's better. It's like, yeah, but they beat Michigan too. So like the argument would have been like, yeah, but Michigan, I think they're still better. That would have immediately caused the playoffs to expand, I think. So the committee really dodged a bullet this year. Anything else on the bowl games? I think I said that already.
No, I think we're good.
All right, playoffs, which is our last topic. I said we might go short this week. We'll see how it ends up. Michigan, Georgia. Michigan's heavy underdogs right now. Both of the teams canceled their media appearances after Alabama did. So I think the order was Alabama canceled, and then, of course, Georgia and Michigan were like, yo, we're canceling too. Cincinnati, I think, had it open, and they might have had some interviews, and then they're like, what are we doing? And I don't know if it's good or bad. Maybe it would have helped them in recruiting, where they're like the smaller school there, and they're the only one that's going to have media interviews, which are going to be used for like the promos and stuff. But I don't know if it would really matter at all, because some of the bigger schools, like I would imagine Michigan has their own team there that's like, hey, we recorded this interview for Harbaugh, here, use this. You know, we don't need recruiting bumps from like Tulsa newspaper that's at the media days. So I don't know. What do you think? Is that going to make a big impact in terms of the appearance this year?
I don't think it will. I mean, I think the thing that will matter more is who can keep players the healthiest. Because real quick, you're seeing how fast guys are dropping because of COVID. It's like I'd be bubble wrapping my guys right now to try to make sure that they understand they got to stay healthy, which I think college to a much greater extent can keep players under lock and key better than what the NFL can.
And you're right. And that's where I think you're kind of in your own bubble. I think they changed it where you can fly down now the day before the game, which I don't know if that would benefit you or not, because I think what's going to happen is they're going to go ahead and let them get used to like the area. I mean, you're flying down from the cold. You're going to be like in Michigan anyway. You're going to be playing in more of the warmer weather. You're in Miami. I think it would be beneficial to go down a little bit early to just run those drills. But you know what? You're going to have outside contact no matter what. I mean, just limiting it the best you can is going to be, or at least better put you into a better situation. And so that's where I don't know how they can make it any better. My real worry now is the championship game. Like if, let's say, there's rumors of like one team having COVID issues right now. If said team plays and it ends up spreading to the other team, no matter who wins, like the team that's sick now or the team they play gets sick, what happens in the championship game? Do they have to forfeit? It's the biggest game of the year.
Yeah.
So, like, do you think they have a chance to forfeit right now? I don't think they do. I think they would just push it back.
No, they absolutely. They've said that they set the dates. They have everything going as is. And that, like, hypothetically, if Michigan, Georgia ends up getting COVID, Alabama gets COVID, Cincinnati's your national champion this year. And didn't have to play a game.
I think they say that. I don't know if it gets to that point. I wonder if that was more of a scare tactic, because I think that they would let them play with whatever players are there, like under whatever certain limit. But we'll see, because I don't think we're really getting a lot of the details now from the teams that are canceling bowl games. I just don't think, because like Michigan came out, I think I mentioned it last week, they came out and scheduled a booster shot, the entire team, right before the game, which, does that get you out of testing? So, like, if that does, because the booster might give you a false positive, you're pretty much set. It's not going to matter. But that's more of like a strategy that they're employing. And it's not going to work out. You're not going to get another booster before the championship game. Right?
I got 6 boosters.
Like, yeah, hey, we have no one needs tested. We just got another booster, by the way, that we're here. But I haven't heard the other teams doing that, so maybe, I don't know. And you're going through different conferences, so like I think each conference has their own policy too, which we've seen last year, which led to a lot of the mess and the controversy, just because the NCAA didn't have the authority to say like, no, you're either all starting on the same time or you're not. It was more of a chicken where it's like, are you guys really playing? And then the next week, everyone else kind of like, yeah, we'll start playing too. And then a couple weeks later, the Big Ten's like, yeah, we'll start playing. And then finally the Pac-12's like, fine, you guys, we'll play too. Put us in the playoff. And then they were like, we didn't get in the playoff. Boo-hoo. So, I don't know. But I think going into it, what's your prediction for, we'll start with Michigan and Georgia, since I talked about it the most.
Well, I think that Michigan stands a really good chance of winning, because they have that mobile threat with the quarterback runs enough, and with that their mix of guys, that they can find the right combination to get the guy with the hot hand and move the ball. I think the issue with Georgia, with their coach playing in multiple being back and forth from Oregon to Georgia, it's going to wear on them. They're not going to be as prepared, and I think they're ripe for the upset.
I'm going to say I have Georgia winning a close one. I think it's a lot closer than what people think. I don't think Georgia's going to win by a touchdown or whatever it is. And I think I've seen a lot of late money coming into it so far on Michigan's behalf because of that. So I don't know how long or how close the line's going to get, but I think it was like 8 or 9 at one point. I think that's way too much. I mean, I think you're going to see a game like Clemson, Georgia at the beginning of the year where it's going to be tight. I don't know if it's going to be as low scoring, but like Georgia had trouble moving the ball in that game too. Didn't they only score on an interception return?
Yeah, I mean, that was part of my argument too. Is that when you look at Georgia's resume this year, it's not like they won the SEC, but
they didn't win the SEC. They won the East.
Yeah, they won their division, and it's like they won the lighter side.
And that's where going into the second game here, I think I'm going to have, if anyone's going to have the upset this week, I think it's going to be Cincinnati. Because I think they've been focused. They've been trying to promote their program. I think I've seen a lot of stuff come out about how they're actually in the Big 12 now, which seems weird to me because, like, yeah, it makes sense. But, like, the Big 12's already trying to capitalize on it, which means that they probably feel they have a good chance. Like, hey, this new Big 12 team just knocked off Alabama. And Alabama, they're in their, like, submarine. They're doing their thing. But if you remember, back in 2016, since I brought it up earlier in the show, Harbaugh took that approach against Florida State where they were like, we're in the submarine, and they came out really flat. And the day before the game, like, Florida State was riding jet skis around and stuff, and they were loose. And I have a feeling like Cincinnati's been looser. They've been more following their regular protocols, where Alabama's kind of just in this weird submarine mode. And I think they come out flat. And I think Alabama comes back because they have the talent. But I just have a feeling like Cincinnati's going to start, when they get up, they're going to pull out some weird stuff. And they're going to just finish the job. And then I think you have like a weird Cincinnati-Georgia championship that a lot of people are just angry at. Because they'll be like, yeah, you know what? Is this the matchup that we should have had for the national championship? Maybe. I think people will watch because they think Cincinnati might finish the job, and hell, maybe they will. Could you imagine Cincinnati running through 2 SEC teams to win the championship? Like, how would that narrative shift? Like, you'd almost immediately, the SEC would be handing out Cincinnati Big 12 stickers. Like, hey, we don't lose to the ACC. What are you talking about? Or AAC, whatever they are. And so that's where I think they really take that next step and they really try to push it and go like, hey, we would need to expand the playoffs. But if it goes like status quo where it's like, even if it's a Georgia-Alabama rematch, I think that might kill the ratings. Everyone keeps saying about how low the ratings were. And then I see some SEC homers say like, no, they were the great last time they played. But last time they played, it was overtime. And they hadn't played. This is a rematch. Alabama-Georgia would be a rematch. And it was a beatdown the first time. Like, do you really think that Georgia would be able to come out and not get beat down again? Because that's my biggest fear. Is like, if Alabama boat raises Cincinnati, I think they just run away with the national championship. And I think that kind of everyone's like, see, they were number one, and it kind of keeps the playoffs as they were. You need a weird result if you want playoffs expanded, I think, sooner rather than later. I think it will happen no matter what, but they really, really like the status quo, these conferences and stuff with the bowl games. So, I don't know. Anything else you have on it?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with Cincinnati, because I think Fickell's offense mirrors what Malzahn did at Auburn and now at UCF. That I think it could be something that's problematic, because Saban has shown he struggles with running quarterbacks and playing some of these like gimmicky style offenses, and that could potentially cause some problems. But I don't know, athlete for athlete. I think Alabama I think they're going to be too much.
See, the one thing that kind of shifts it for me is that Cincinnati has some lockdown cornerbacks that are NFL caliber. And if you have that, you're able to shorten the game. Because a lot of what Alabama did, even against Georgia, is they're throwing deep throws and giving up quick scores and stuff like that. And it's like, all right, well, quit giving up the big plays. What are you guys doing? I thought you had an awesome defense. And they weren't able to grind the ball out, where Cincinnati has that offense. They have kind of the spread. Alabama's had trouble with that in the past. I mean, remember when Cardale Jones ran all over them? So, like, it's still the same kind of defense that Nick Saban runs. So,
yeah,
you're going to have that. And you're going to have a defense where you're going to, if they're able to keep Alabama's guys locked down, playing on an island, then I think that's where you really have the chance for the upset. And that's what I'm thinking of with my prediction. Like, I think that's where they're really going to go with it. And I don't know if there's going to be anything else that would make it a close game. Like, if they're not able to single up those receivers, they're probably going to get killed. So I'm really banking on those guys having a big showing, but that's really the end of my prediction, you know. But that's really all I have for this week. Do you have anything for the final bell?
No, don't. Just enjoy the holidays, be safe, and continue the support. Yep,
definitely go to southboundsports.com and check it out. Hope everyone has a great New Year's, and we will see you next week.